I'm not phrasing that like I want us to strike Iran, but we had a lot of mixed signals. We were going to strike. We were sending assets there. Then we didn't strike. Trump says, oh, it's because, he gives his reason. Netanyahu says, oh, we talked him out of it. What do you think the reason is that the U.S. chickened out and is not striking Iran, or do you think we are about to strike Iran?
We'll be very careful of using that term chicken out. I'm told that if you mention taco, Trump always chickens out on the White House, that you'll be shot on sight. Trump will not tolerate that. I think there's a lot of confusion and, frankly, disinformation. What I think you're seeing is another manifestation of the absence of any real strategic planning, thinking, preparation before execution. Everything is impulse driven. It's whatever Donald Trump wakes up and decides he wants to do. His cabinet scurries around and tries to respond to it. Now, in reality, what happened? I think that we thought we had an opportunity inside Iran to really disrupt the regime, even bring it down. This, of course, was based on the protests that are really a consequence of a terrible economic situation and the dramatic reduction in value of the rial, the Iranian currency. Now, a lot of us have wondered why Iran has not gone to BRICS or to the Chinese or someone and said, look, lend me $1 billion, because they could do that easily. That would boost the economy and help the situation tremendously. But for some reason, they haven't done that. Now, I know there's Islamic law that essentially forbids usury. This is one of the reasons the banks in the Islamic world tend to be very solid as opposed to ours. I don't know if that's the justification for it, but the bottom line is that what you started with were very legitimate protests about the economic conditions in Iran. Those overlapped with a struggle, political struggle, between reformers and conservatives. This then was developed into a CIA, Mossad, MI6 operation with the introduction of thousands of these Starlight terminals, enormous quantities of money, which in that setting, of course, is going to buy a certain amount of support. And now we have all sorts of evidence that's being provided overseas as well as here at home for instructions given to people in the crowds to fire on the police and provoke the police to shoot back at them in the hopes that people would be killed. And this then would worsen the situation. Well, all of this unfolded, and it failed. It failed for a whole variety of reasons. The failure began, I would argue, last week on Friday when the Iranians and the Turks cooperated to annihilate 400 Kurdish fighters who were trying to move from Syria into Iran. Mm-hmm. I don't think the Mossad or the CIA anticipated that, but I think that's a very important development. There's a growing appreciation in Turkey for the criticality of stability and unity in Iran. The two states, for different reasons, have been competitors and sometimes enemies over 1,000 years, but both are civilizational states. We need to understand that. Americans don't have any idea what that means. Iran is Persia. The Persian Empire has been with us for 2,500, 2,600 years. They have a unique civilization and culture. So do the Turks, for very similar reasons. The Turks came out of Central Asia. They're not Arabs. Anyway, the point is that both of these states are not going to help us or the Israelis destroy one or the other, because they see their survival as civilizational states at risk. So what's happened is that the Starlight terminals were largely picked up, confiscated. The Chinese assisted technically helping to suppress and jam these things and the satellite connections. I think the Russians have helped in whatever way they could, but the point is, I think President Trump was told that this was a golden moment in time, which would allow him with very little effort to topple the government. That failed miserably. Secondly, once it became clear that failed, I can't prove this, but I suspect the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, probably told him, if we're going to do this, we're going to need more firepower, because what we anticipated has not happened. In other words, the country is not imploding. Its armed forces are intact. Its integrated air and missile defenses are intact, and so forth. And I think at that point, stories were spun out to explain why now suddenly the attack was off. And remember, President Trump tried to persuade people, well, they've stopped killing, and I told them I didn't want them to kill. Give us a break. There's no evidence that Trump gives a damn about who lives or dies in the Middle East, least of all Iran. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just nonsense. And I think they had a Pakistani diplomat insists in his discussions with the Iranians that they told him that they informed Trump that they were scaling back on the killing. Now, maybe that was true, but I don't think it's killing in the sense of what you saw in the riots. I think it's really executions of fifth columnists, people that betrayed their country and sold out principally to Mossad, because you had, according to Mr. Pompeo, lots of Mossad agents out in the audience. Well, gosh, what a shock.
Right.
So I think they probably told, it could be that President Putin, because supposedly the Russians have had their hand in advising them, said, listen, scale back on these executions for the moment.
Yeah.
Even though we tolerate these kinds of executions in Saudi Arabia and any other places all the time, and Trump never expressed any concern about the loss of life in Gaza. So who knows? But I think the show is on. You have to look at the Lincoln Carrier Battle Group. It's still on its way to the region. We may see a second show up. I wouldn't be surprised. Mm-hmm. So I think the war is definitely on the agenda. And I don't see any evidence that Mr. Netanyahu is relenting. This is his golden moment. Either he acts and gets the full support, unconditional support of the United States Armed Forces, and wins his war in his mind, or he loses.
Yeah. There was an odd earthquake in Israel yesterday. I don't know if you heard about this, a very short, odd earthquake that people are reporting happened right at where Israel would potentially be keeping nuclear weapons, that perhaps they were doing a test. They'd also had reportedly said that there was going to be an earthquake drill at the very moment that that it actually happened. Like they could predict, they knew when this earthquake was coming, which we don't have that kind of technology at this point to know when earthquakes are coming unless you're causing the earthquake. So do you think that Israel is preparing to go nuclear against Iran?
Well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that could have been an underground nuclear test in the vicinity of Dimona, which is the region you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But we don't know. And you're not going to get the truth out of the United States government, which is essentially in the grip of Mr. Netanyahu and his billionaire donors in the United States. So I don't think we're going to find out the truth on that subject. Just keep in mind from the very beginning, and I'm not the Lone Ranger, I've said this several times, there is always a danger that if things go south for the Israelis, that they will turn to a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
We estimate they have between 250 and 300 nuclear warheads, potentially. I don't know how many launchers. Some of these are on submarines. They have several Dolphin-class submarines the Germans gifted to them that were modified to carry cruise missiles with nuclear warheads. They can also deliver these from missiles on the ground. They can deliver them from F-15s to F-35s. So they have that capacity. And, this is something that the Turks have addressed, actually, obliquely. Even Mr. Erdogan publicly said, we know what you have, and we're not afraid. Well, the reason he's not afraid is that for years, and we're going back 30 years, the Pakistanis have promised the Turks a nuclear weapon if they need it. That's always been available to the Turks. And obviously, what a catastrophe that would be for the Middle East if the Israelis were arrogant and stupid enough to use a nuclear weapon. Then I think we would see nuclear weapons spring up all over the place, and that would be the end of Israel. So I hope that's not going to happen. But I don't see any evidence. Maybe you do, Kim. I don't see any evidence that we have any real influence over Israel. I see a lot of evidence that Israel has huge influence over us.
Yeah. And I think they are crazy enough to use a nuke. I mean, I don't put that outside of the realm of possibility. Their behavior has shown that they don't value human life to the level that one would expect of a Western democracy that they claim to be. But Iran, reportedly, there's also a bunch of hypersonic missiles pointed at Israel right now from Iran. Mm-hmm. And what's Israel's defense? I mean, Israel's a tiny country. Iran's massive. They saw what happened to them this past summer, spring. So I would think that they would be gearing up with a nuclear weapon, and I don't put it past them to use it. The question is then, what would Iran do? I mean, the thinking for America is, well, the nuclear weapons we dropped on Japan, that ended the war. That was it. So Israel would think, okay, we dropped the nuke and that'll end the war. That'll be it. But I don't know if that would be it.
No, I don't. I don't think so. Which is the rationale for the comments I made to you earlier. Remember that Iran consists of a population of over 90 million. The country itself is the size of Western Europe. You have the Turks who are not far behind them. And I think that the use of a nuclear weapon could precipitate the opposite of what the Israelis think it might produce.
Right.
Of course, they may then assume that we will employ our nuclear weapons that we have at sea in support of them. I hope not, because if that were even possible, that would very definitely bring in the Russians and the Iranians. Remember that the Iranians buy roughly 30% of their oil from Iran. It comes through the Persian Gulf.
The Chinese, you mean?
Chinese, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Russians are very, very concerned about their southern flank because of Central Asia. They want a stable partner in Iran. Iran, if it were to become destabilized or worse yet, divided or fragmented into smaller states, could prove to be an enormous problem for the Russians. They want good relations because they also want Iran to be part of BRICS and this thing we call the One Belt, One Road project. And we've already seen trains arrive from China in Iran carrying various goods. So Iran is a critical member of the what I would call the China, Russia, India, Iranian quadrangle, if you will. All of these states are linked in one way or another. So we're looking at a real potential in the region for Armageddon, which I suppose there are some deranged people that welcome that on the belief of that some has some sort of religious payoff, but for the rest of us, it's insane.
Right.
And we should try and stop it to the extent that we can. But here's the problem: as I was reviewing this man Witkoff, the real estate guru or whatever that is friends with Trump, who runs around with Kushner making deals and pocketing huge quantities of money, at the same time theoretically representing us. And he communicated these demands to Iran. He said, stop enriching uranium, reduce missile stockpiles, reduce approximately 2,000 kilograms of enriched uranium material to 60%, and stop supporting, quote unquote, regional proxies. That means anybody that Israel doesn't like.
Right.
In return, we'll lift sanctions. Well, that's just, it's they can't comply with that. You might as well say the same thing to the Russians. We keep making demands of the Russians, now making demands of Iran that they won't meet because they're sovereign states. And the more that you threaten, the more persuaded they are that they desperately need to build up their military capacity. So it looks like a dead end, and I think we're going to see this war break out probably in 7 to 10 days.
How does it end? I mean, when it comes to regime change, for example, I don't know why they ever thought there's only one way. I mean, we've been doing all of these various tactics to try to get the people inside of countries to turn on their leadership, right? We've sanctioned Cuba for how long, kept them poor for how long, did the same thing to Venezuela. They saw 130,000% increase in inflation. It didn't work. It didn't oust Maduro. There's really only one way for regime change to happen, and that is the military's got to turn on you. And that has historically been the case over and over and over again. When you lose the military, that's when you lose your power. It all comes down to military. So it doesn't look like the Iranian regime, the Iranian military is turning against the Iranian government anytime soon. I mean, maybe, and that would be the only way I could see change actually happening. Otherwise, you just end up in an all-out war, a bloody war, and then I don't know exactly how does that one end. We're not going to go and conquer Iran, are we? I mean, what would be the end game of that war? How would it end?
Israel is in a win or lose everything situation. So if Israel embarks on this war with Iran, the leadership of Iran, the state of Iran, must be destroyed. If it's not destroyed, Israel will be destroyed. I mean, this is the view from Netanyahu and the people that support him. So this is a one-way ticket to Armageddon. So, whatever happens, unless miraculously, as you point out, everything changes, which I don't expect to happen in Iran, this will end up being the destruction of Israel. Now, here we are, and we have pledged our life, treasure, blood, everything to defend Israel to the bitter end. Well, what does that mean? How far are we willing to go?
Right.
Are we willing to engage in a nuclear exchange on behalf of Israel? Well, right now, I would say President Trump would do whatever he's told by Netanyahu and his donors. I just read the other day something about Ron Lauder, this billionaire whose mother or grandmother, I guess, was thrown out of Vienna, Austria back when the Nazis took over, and she had a perfume business. She came to the United States and made it into $1 billion perfume industry. Supposedly, he is the one who planted the idea of annexing Greenland with the president. So we know who the president listens to. He listens to his billionaire friends and buddies, who all happen to be Zionists. Mm-hmm. So my great concern is that instead of acting like the president of the United States, he'll act like the president of Israel. And that means that he'll rush to the defense of Israel come hell or high water. I mean, isn't that why Mark Levin calls President Trump the first Jewish president of the United States?
I just don't know how this ends. I mean, that's just the real question. Do you think we're going to end up sending American boots and putting them on the ground in Iran?
No. The country's too big. There are too many people involved. We couldn't control Afghanistan if our lives depended upon it. Mm-hmm. We couldn't control Vietnam, really. Unless you're willing to go in and essentially behave like Genghis Khan and kill 40 or 50,000 people to make your point, which, thank God, we have not been willing to do, mm-hmm. Then I don't see much hope. I mean, in Algeria, where the French had enormous success against an insurgency, they always admitted that as soon as you pulled the troops out of the area, you lost control again. So I don't see any future for that. All I see is the potential for enormous destruction of life and property. The other thing is that we should not discount the readiness of the Russians or the Chinese to become involved in this.
Yeah.
And I think we do. And I think President Putin has tried very hard to make it clear, don't do this. Don't engage in this war against Iran. And I think we've said, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Listen to General Keane, who probably is one of Trump's senior military advisors for all intents and purposes. And what does he say? Oh, Putin's bluffing. The Ukrainians are winning. Millions of Russians are dying. The economy's broken. Don't worry. That hasn't worked out very well. No. But I think he still is singing the tune that the president is hearing in his ear.
Well, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you so much for being here and giving us your insight into this. It's a scary time for sure. Again, I just don't know how what they think the outcome, what a positive winning outcome is for them. If they think they could go in and somehow control Iran, take down the government, and then what? Are we gonna break it up into pieces? And
remember that we would like to have control of the oil.
Right. Well, of course. Right.
Well, yeah, but that extends the life of the petrodollar. The petrodollar is in a lot of trouble.
Right.
Without petrodollar, you cannot borrow in perpetuity. We want to continue to borrow in perpetuity. So there are a lot of other things going on. That's why the Iranians know exactly what the game is. And we think we're going to have a win in Venezuela. Now we're going to send private contractors down there to protect the oil drilling rigs from being attacked by the locals.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. I mean, you know what private contractors end up doing? They're mercenaries. Mm-hmm. That is a recipe for corruption on a scale that we don't even want to think about. It looks like the 30s, go in and rescue international fruit, send in the Marines or something.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work very well in Venezuela. I think all of this is going to come apart. In the meantime, just turn on the returns from the various bond markets, listen to the economic analysts, and they all tell you we're headed into bubble bursting territory.
Yeah.
Which bubble do you want to go first? Commercial real estate, private real estate? I mean, we could spend all kinds of time. So one of the things that could get in the way of everything that President Trump wants to do is fiscal reality. That may save us.
Right.
Hell of a thought.
Well, tell us about the national conversation so people can actually hang out with you. Is that what this is? They could actually join you face to face?
Well, we started in Dallas on the 4th of October last year, and we had a good session. It was limited to numbers of people, but the idea was that we wanted every 3 or 4 months to go somewhere new in the country, all across the country, and hold sessions with 400, 500, 600 people. And we would bring in some, subject matter experts, answer questions, but then the audience can directly address any of the subject matter experts, not just me, and say, well, listen, I don't agree with that. This is what I think. So we wanted this forum because we really want to know what Americans think. Mm-hmm. I don't think most of the time we do. Mm-hmm. We look at polling data, but you don't get a chance to look at the polling questions. You have no control over who shows up and who says anything. So that's part of it. And it's a good alternative to what John Belushi used to talk about in Animal House. When things get bad, what was John Belushi's solution? Drink heavily. Come to the next event that we are having. We're putting together 3 more cities. We'll have that out soon. And don't drink heavily. Come and show up and express your views. Keep in mind that President Trump, whether he cares to admit it publicly, faces humiliation nationally and internationally. Now, why is that the case? Because he's grossly miscalculated, grossly underestimated the challenge that he took on when he decided to attack Iran. I think he listened to a lot of vacuous promises from the Israeli side. The Israelis tend to feel contempt for the various Muslims and countries that surround them, which is a very bad thing. I think he bought the argument that this would be quick and dirty and that he could somehow or another profit from it. He now knows that's not possible. So, this is back to what does he do next? And I think his instincts are saying, I've got to double down and smash Iran. I've got to rub their noses in the dirt. So I never took seriously this 5-day pause. If anything, the pause that he's taking, and by the way, as you point out, that doesn't apply to the Israelis. The Israelis are bombing oil infrastructure, plants, anything they can. And that doesn't help matters, but they're not terribly responsive at this stage to President Trump. I think they regard him as a bought man who's going to have to do whatever they tell him. I think that's a mistake because I do know President Trump, and if you push him too hard in one direction, he's going to push back. I think, though, at the moment, he's looking at this as a 5-day pause, and I suppose that his inner circle, including the military, they're all sitting in rooms saying, how do we get out of this? How does this end? What's the end state look like? What can we accept? And an awful lot in Washington is mortgaged to vanity. In other words, we can't do X because that will make us look as though we lost. And as I point out to people, what happened in Vietnam? And people say, what do you mean? I said, we lost. And what did we do? And everybody says, well, I don't remember. We
mortgage
left.
On the collateral of thousands of American lives?
Yeah, we left. We just left. We lost and we left. And we said, too bad about the 58,500 American lives. And oh, by the way, too bad about the nearly 2 million Vietnamese we killed, needlessly and pointlessly. We just left. And many, many years later, you had people that went back to Vietnam from the United States, some of whom had served in Vietnam, like former Senator Webb. And they went there and said, look, this was a terrible mistake and we regret it deeply and we want to do business with you. And much to everybody's surprise, the Vietnamese were willing to cooperate. And we've had better relations since then than ever in our history. But this is a bad habit with America. I mean, I dislike it, but this is the way we do business. And I think that at some point this could happen again. But right now, I think you're going to see this war take on new dimensions. Now, when we talk about invading Iran, I love to go back to the Dardanelles in 1915 when the British decided, well, it was really Churchill, who was always severely inebriated when he made most of his decisions, and he was equivalent to the Secretary of the Navy or a minister for the Navy. And he said, well, we need to seize the Dardanelles. And once we've seized these from the Turks, then the Royal Navy can sail through the Dardanelles, through the Straits, and it can take Constantinople under fire. And we'll land more troops in Constantinople and drive the Turks out of the war. And they decided, well, after they lost some ships that they couldn't defend in the Straits, they said, well, we're going to land a force there to take the Straits. Well, if you look at the Straits and the Dardanelles, and then you look at the Straits of Hormuz, the Straits and the Dardanelles, you know, the British landed here and the Turks were up here.
Right.
And that's the way it stayed for 9 months. And they went from 75,000 troops up to 500,000 troops. It was a catastrophe. Finally, this man Kitchener, and I'm sure you'll remember who Herbert Kitchener was, one of Britain's famous imperialist generals.
Sure.
Kitchener said, this is crazy. We can't win this, and withdrew everybody. The British lost about 50,000 killed. And they pulled all 500,000 men out, and it failed. Now, if you go to the Straits of Hormuz, you look at the walls around the strait, instead of being like this, they're almost like this. How are you going to take this and control it? Where do you put soldiers or Marines to control anything? Well, there are these discussions about going into the Persian Gulf and seizing islands, whether it's Karg at the top or any of the others. I doubt it. I doubt it. I think that's a bridge too far for them. And if you land down near the border with Pakistan, Baluchistan, and you try to march north, that would be the death march of death marches for an army trying to cross these vast territories. And here's something else that people just don't understand. We live in a new world. Everybody says, well, this is asymmetric warfare. No, it's not. You have on one side the United States, which has fielded its World War II force structure. You're looking at the 1944-45 force structure with new stuff, but it's the same force structure. Aircraft carrier battle groups, lots of aircraft, bombers, and so forth. On the other side is the new 21st century force structure, and that is the ISR strike structure. Well, what does that look like? Well, this was first created as an idea by the Russians in the 1970s, and what they figured out was you have sensors in space, you have sensors at sea, you have sensors on the ground, sensors midway between space, terrestrial. You link all of these sensors in real time to all of these strike systems, which are becoming very precise. And now we've reached the point where this precision is striking. It's incredible. And we once had a monopoly on precision back before the turn of the century. We've lost that. That precision capability rests in the hands of people all over the world. And suddenly mid-range powers that before were largely incapable of presenting resistance can shut down our armed forces. And what you have now is the ability from space to see everything all the time. We call it persistent surveillance. You have Chinese satellites, Russian satellites feeding this imagery and information to the Iranians. The Iranians take this instantaneously, match it to their tactical ballistic missiles, their cruise missiles, their unmanned systems, and they can launch out to 1,000 miles. They can destroy ports on the Red Sea. They can essentially shut down traffic, commercial traffic, but more important, military traffic.
Yeah.
So if you tried to land on the southern part of Iran, they would see it immediately. The only question that they would then ask themselves is, how long do we wait before we destroy it? Watch the buildup, let them come ashore, and then annihilate them with all of the weapon systems I just described. Now move over to the Persian Gulf. How do you get the Marines and the soldiers there? Are you going to fly them on V-22s and helicopters? Are you going to drop them from the air with parachutes? And once they land, what do? You know, we have a saying in the military, in the Army at any rate, what you do after you arrive is much more important than how fast you get there. Now, we can move all this light infantry there very quickly. And you know what? Under the wrong circumstances, they can also die very quickly because you have no means to protect them. I don't know what the thinking is. Perhaps there is some sort of miracle of engineering that breaks the laws of physics that will allow us to magically insert people without anybody being seen. I have no idea, but I haven't seen it. So my assumption is the laws of physics still apply. And as a result, we're going to put a lot of people in a very dangerous place, and we're not going to get the effect from it that we want. I mean, I'm sure you've heard people say, in fact, Senator Graham said this, well, if we take Clark Island, war over, that's it.
It's alarming, he says.
Crazy. I mean, you mean there's no other way for the Iranians to export oil? And by the way, the Iranians have made it very clear, if you do this to us and you destroy our oil infrastructure, or try to, and our natural gas, then you're all going to lose everything in the Gulf. All these GCC countries that have been loyal vassals, first of the British Empire that created them, and then secondly became our vassal states, in return for which we said we'd protect all these family dictatorships, they're going to be out of business, not just today, but permanently.
Right.
So I just don't see an easy way out, but I think we're going to try something. And I think it's going to